The sun beat down hard on the small, dusty town of Jasper Ridge. It was the kind of place where people passed through without a second thought, barely noticing the sun-bleached buildings or the tumbleweeds rolling across the street. But today things were different. Today the whole town was whispering about something that had never been seen before. Inside the saloon, the usual sounds of clinking glasses and rough laughter filled the air. The old piano player in the corner kept his fingers dancing over the keys, but even his tune couldn't drown out the buzz of gossip. The topic of the day was a woman, and not just any woman. This was Kaya, an Apache woman who had been brought to town under strange circumstances. She was being sold, not in the way most people were used to, but in a bargain that made everyone uneasy. Kaya had arrived in Jasper Ridge in the back of a wagon, her dark eyes staring out from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her face was a mix of beauty and quiet strength, the kind of beauty that didn't need to shout. There was something about her, something that made people stop and take notice. Her long dark hair was braided tight against her back, and her clothes, though simple, were rugged, made for survival in the harshest parts of the world. She wasn't like the other women in town. She wasn't dressed up in fancy gowns or worried about how she looked in the eyes of others. Kaya was a woman who had lived through hardship, and it showed in the way she carried herself. But it wasn't just her appearance that had people talking. It was the deal that had been made for her. A rancher named Bill Tanner had paid a hefty sum for her, under the agreement that she would please him. If she didn't, he would get his money back, no questions asked. Tanner wasn't known for his kindness, but he had a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost, and he believed that all women could be bought if the price was right. He'd heard the stories about Kaya, how fierce she was, how independent, but he was sure that gold and a firm hand could change that. The contract had been made in the saloon, right in front of everyone. It had all started as a joke, a bet among the men at the bar, but it quickly turned serious when Tanner stepped in with a bag full of coins. There had been some laughter, some murmurs, but no one had dared to stop him. Kaya had been sold just like that. The deal was simple. If she didn't please Tanner, he would get his money back. That was the price of a woman like her, at least in Tanner's eyes. The other men in town looked at the exchange with mixed feelings. Some saw it as just another transaction in a world where money spoke louder than anything else. Others, however, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in their stomachs, as if something was terribly wrong with what had just happened. But no one dared to speak up. They were too afraid of crossing Tanner, too afraid of what might happen if they challenged his authority. Later that afternoon, Kaya was led into the saloon, her face expressionless as she walked past the men who stared at her with curiosity and judgment. Tanner sat at a table in the corner, his eyes fixed on her, a smug smile tugging at his lips. He believed he had control over her now, that she was just another prize to be claimed. But Kaya wasn't like the other women he had dealt with. She wasn't interested in the fancy clothes, the money, or the promises. She had been through far worse than what this town could offer. As she made her way through the saloon, the other patrons fell silent. Kaya's presence commanded attention, but it wasn't the kind of attention that made a person feel comfortable. There was power in the way she walked, a power that came from a life spent surviving in the harshest parts of the world. Her eyes were sharp, taking in everything around her even as she kept her head held high. The men, most of them rough and hardened by years of living in the wild, felt a chill run down their spines as she passed. She wasn't afraid of them, and that unsettled them more than they cared to admit. Bill Tanner rose from his seat, his boots creaking against the wooden floor. He walked up to her with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck and a weathered face. His hand reached out to take hers, but Kaya didn't flinch. She simply stood there looking up at him with steady eyes, as if she had seen it all before and wasn't impressed. "Well, well," Tanner said with a grin. "Ain't you a sight? You'll do just fine." His grip tightened around her wrist, and Kaya didn't fight it. She knew what he expected of her, but she wasn't the kind of woman who would bow to anyone, not even him. The men in the saloon watched the scene unfold, some with amusement, others with discomfort. This was the kind of thing that was talked about in the back rooms, but never seen firsthand. They had heard the rumors about the Apache woman, how she was more than just a beauty, how she had been through things that would break most men. But now they could see it in her eyes, the defiance that burned there, refusing to be extinguished by anyone's expectations. Tanner led Kaya to a table in the back of the saloon, where a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses sat waiting for them. He poured himself a drink, then offered her one, but Kaya didn't move. Her gaze never left him, cold and calculating, as if she was weighing every word, every action. "I'm not like the others," Tanner said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not here to make you into something you're not. But if you don't do your part, well, I won't hesitate to take my money back. I think you understand that." Kaya didn't reply right away. Instead, she took a step forward, her boots barely making a sound on the creaky floorboards. She looked him in the eye, her voice low but firm when she spoke. "You think you can buy me with your money?" she said, her voice steady. "But you're wrong. No one can buy me." Tanner's smile faded slightly, but he quickly recovered. He was used to women being afraid of him, used to getting what he wanted without a fight. Kaya, however, was different. She didn't fear him, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by a woman like her. As the night wore on, the tension in the saloon grew thicker. Kaya and Tanner sat at the table, each watching the other, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing minute. The townspeople continued to watch from the corners of the room, their eyes darting back and forth between the two of them, unsure of what would happen next. Kaya had been bought, but it was clear she wasn't willing to be owned. She was a woman of her own making, and no amount of money could change that. But as the evening dragged on, something shifted. The door to the saloon opened, and a cowboy stepped inside. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that suggested he had spent a lifetime in the saddle. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on Kaya and Tanner. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. The cowboy didn't speak right away. Instead, he made his way to the bar, ordering a drink before taking a seat at the far end of the room. But his attention never strayed far from the table where Kaya and Tanner sat. There was something about the way the cowboy watched them, as if he knew something the others didn't. The night was far from over, and as the hours passed, Kaya began to realize that this town and its people weren't the only things she had to worry about. Something else was in the air, something that was about to change the course of her fate forever. The night stretched on, and the low hum of the saloon filled the air with a sense of unease. The flickering lanterns cast long shadows across the wooden floor, and the faces in the room grew more curious as they watched the unfolding scene. Kaya sat across from Bill Tanner, her posture calm, almost casual, as though the weight of the situation didn't affect her. Tanner, on the other hand, seemed to be growing increasingly impatient. He had expected her to fall in line, to submit as every other woman had. But Kaya wasn't like the others, and that was becoming clear. He leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving her face. "You know, I don't like to repeat myself," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "I bought you for a reason, and it's not just to have you sit there looking at me like that. There's a deal here, and you'll play your part." Kaya didn't flinch. Her dark eyes met his, unwavering, filled with a quiet strength that Tanner couldn't quite comprehend. She wasn't afraid, and that unsettled him in ways he couldn't put into words. This was supposed to be simple. He'd seen women like her before, rough around the edges but easily broken down. But Kaya wasn't like the others. She had a fire inside her that he hadn't expected, and it made him feel uncertain. The saloon's piano player struck a few random notes, trying to fill the silence, but even the music couldn't shake the tension in the air. A few men lingered at the bar exchanging whispers, but none dared to interrupt the standoff between Kaya and Tanner. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, something that would change the course of the night. Bill Tanner was used to getting what he wanted. He was a man who thought money could solve everything, that it could bend anyone to his will. But Kaya wasn't like the others. She wasn't interested in his gold or his promises. She had seen too much in her life to care about those things. Tanner might own her for now, but she wasn't his to command. Not now, not ever. After a long pause, Tanner set his glass down with a thud, his expression hardening. "Listen, I don't care where you came from or what you've been through. I'm not here to play games. You'll do what I say, and if you don't, we'll be done here real quick. You'll get nothing, and I'll take back my money. That's how it works." Kaya remained silent for a moment, her eyes still locked on his, but this time there was a shift in her expression. She didn't smile, but there was a certain calmness in the way she held herself, as if she knew exactly what he was trying to do. She wasn't intimidated by his threats or his arrogance. She had been through worse, and she knew how to survive. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but firm. "You don't own me. You never will." Tanner's jaw tightened. He was used to women being afraid, used to them begging and pleading for his attention. But Kaya wasn't like that. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her bend to his will, and that angered him more than anything. "You'll learn soon enough," he growled. "I'm not here to be patient." Kaya stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. She didn't look at Tanner as she turned to face the door, her back straight and her shoulders squared. She had no intention of playing his game. She wasn't going to be part of his world no matter what he thought. She had been sold, yes, but that didn't mean she was going to let him control her. Just as Kaya reached the door, the cowboy, the one who had been watching her from the corner of the room, stood up. His boots clicked against the floor as he made his way toward her, his eyes never leaving her. There was something about him that drew her in, something in the way he carried himself. He wasn't like the other men in the room, and he wasn't like Tanner. There was no arrogance in his stride, no sense of entitlement. He moved with purpose, as if he knew exactly what was happening and where it was going. The moment he reached her, Kaya stopped and looked up at him. The cowboy gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of understanding. She didn't know why, but in that brief moment something between them shifted. She didn't feel threatened. In fact, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: respect. "I'll buy you," the cowboy said, his voice steady and calm. Kaya glanced back at Tanner, who was still sitting at the table, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. Tanner didn't speak right away. He just stared at the cowboy, trying to make sense of what was happening. "You're going to buy her?" Tanner scoffed. "She's already mine." The cowboy didn't flinch. "I'll offer you half of what you paid for her. Take it or leave it." Tanner's face turned red with anger. "You think I'm going to sell her to you for half the price? I've already made the deal. She's mine." The cowboy didn't back down. "You can keep your gold, but you won't keep her. Not this way." There was a tense silence as the two men locked eyes. Tanner's hand twitched as if he was about to make a move, but the cowboy's calm demeanor held him in check. Kaya didn't know this man, but there was something in the way he spoke, something in the way he stood up for her, that made her feel as though she wasn't alone. She had always fought for herself, but here, in this moment, it felt like someone else was willing to fight alongside her. After what felt like an eternity, Tanner finally spoke, his voice laced with frustration. "Fine, take her, but you'll regret it." The cowboy nodded, not a hint of hesitation in his movements. He turned to Kaya and gave her a simple, quiet smile. "You're free to go now." Kaya hesitated for a moment, looking from Tanner to the cowboy. She had been through so much, and she had learned to rely on herself. But something about the way the cowboy spoke to her, the way he respected her, made her feel like this was the first time in a long time that someone had seen her as more than just property. With a final glance at Tanner, Kaya stepped toward the cowboy. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but out of the realization that her fate was about to change. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This man had just given her a chance to live her life on her own terms. The two of them walked out of the saloon together, the doors swinging shut behind them. The townspeople watched them leave, their whispers fading into the distance. Kaya was no longer a part of Tanner's world. She was free, at least for now, and whatever came next, she was ready to face it. As the sun set over the rugged land, casting a warm orange glow over the open plains, Kaya and the cowboy rode side by side, their horses' hooves kicking up dust in the quiet evening air. The distant mountains loomed ahead, their peaks still bathed in the last rays of the day. Kaya had never been outside the town of Jasper Ridge for long, and the vastness of the land stretched out before her like a canvas, waiting to be painted with her future. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely, away from the heavy weight of men's expectations, away from the cage she had been locked in. The cowboy, whose name was Colt, led the way without saying much. His manner was calm and unhurried, as though he was used to the wild open spaces. He was a drifter, moving from place to place, living by his own rules. Kaya could sense that he didn't care much for the world of gold and power that men like Tanner inhabited. He was different from the ranchers, different from the townspeople who saw her as a prize to be bought and sold. Colt didn't look at her with the same greed in his eyes. There was something more in the way he glanced at her, respect perhaps, or a quiet understanding. As they rode, Kaya found herself growing more and more curious about him. She had been through so much in her life. Too many broken promises, too many harsh words, too many times she had been treated like less than a person. But Colt was different. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep, and he didn't try to change her. He was simply there, walking alongside her as an equal. She had never known anyone like him. After a while, they stopped by a small creek. The water trickled gently over the rocks, and the sound of it was soothing in the stillness of the evening. Colt dismounted first, tying his horse to a nearby tree. Kaya followed his lead, her legs stiff from the long ride. She hadn't spoken much during the journey, lost in her thoughts, but now, standing by the water's edge, she felt a need to break the silence. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice quiet, unsure. "You don't even know me." Colt looked over at her, his eyes thoughtful. He was a man of few words, but he understood that sometimes people just needed to ask the questions they had kept buried inside. He took a deep breath and then shrugged, as though the answer was simpler than she realized. "I've seen too many women like you," he said softly. "Too many broken people stuck in situations they can't escape. I guess I just didn't want to see you end up like them. Like a piece of property. You're more than that." Kaya's chest tightened at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that, as though she mattered for reasons other than what they could take from her. For the first time, she realized that Colt wasn't trying to fix her, wasn't trying to make her into something she wasn't. He simply saw her for who she was, without judgment. She knelt beside the creek and cupped her hands to scoop up some of the cool water, drinking slowly. The crispness of it helped clear her head, and she closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the peace of the land around her. It was the kind of quiet she had always craved, a place where the world wasn't constantly pressing in on her. "Do you always just help people without asking anything in return?" she asked, her voice still low, unsure if she was pushing too much. Colt chuckled softly, though it wasn't the kind of laugh that was meant to mock. It was a sound born of experience, of someone who had seen the best and the worst in people. "Not always," he said, "but when I see someone who's been treated wrong, it feels like the right thing to do." Kaya nodded, though part of her still felt uneasy. She didn't want to feel like she owed him something. She didn't want to be indebted to anyone. She had spent too many years feeling like a prize to be won, a possession to be traded. But with Colt, things felt different. There was no pressure, no expectation that she would owe him anything. He was simply giving her the freedom she had always longed for. They set up camp as the evening grew darker. The stars began to twinkle in the sky, casting a soft glow over the land. Kaya sat down by the fire that Colt had started, the warmth of it welcome against the cool night air. She had never felt more at ease than she did in this moment, surrounded by nothing but the open wilderness and the company of a man who treated her like an equal. Colt didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. His actions spoke for him. He passed her a piece of jerky and some dried beans, making sure she had enough to eat. He wasn't the kind of man to make grand gestures, but there was something deeply reassuring in his presence. She could tell that he wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. What you saw was what you got with Colt, and for some reason that made her feel safer than she had in a long time. As they ate in silence, the fire crackling between them, Kaya found herself thinking back on her life. She had grown up in the wilderness, raised by her people, learning the ways of the land. But everything changed when the white men came. They took everything from her, her family, her home, her freedom. She had been forced into a world she didn't understand, a world where she was nothing but a token to be traded. But now, sitting here with Colt, it was as if she had a chance to reclaim what had been stolen from her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she didn't have to be defined by the past. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she truly belonged. After they finished eating, Colt pulled a small, weathered map from his bag and began to study it under the firelight. Kaya watched him for a moment before standing up and walking over to him. She had never been much of a traveler, always confined to the land that her people had once called home. But the idea of venturing out into the unknown stirred something inside her. "Where are we going?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Colt looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I just keep moving. Sometimes that's all you can do." Kaya nodded, understanding more than she let on. She had been running her whole life, but now, for the first time, she wasn't running away from something. She was running towards something, something that felt like freedom, something that had always seemed so out of reach. The fire crackled as the two of them sat there in silence, the stars shining above them like 1,000 possibilities. Kaya felt the weight of her past slipping away with each passing moment. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe. The journey ahead was uncertain. There were still dangers, still obstacles to face. But in this moment, Kaya knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. The following days passed slowly, the air growing cooler as fall crept across the land. Kaya and Colt traveled together, covering miles of rough terrain, staying off the beaten path. The world they rode through was wide and empty, the silence broken only by the sounds of their horses' hooves and the occasional call of a hawk soaring high above. There were no towns, no distractions, just the two of them in the open wilderness. Though they didn't speak much, there was a growing understanding between them. Kaya felt a sense of peace she had never known before. Colt wasn't like the men she had known in the past. He didn't push her to speak or act in any particular way. He simply accepted her for who she was, and that was something she hadn't experienced in years. At first, Kaya had kept her distance. She wasn't used to trusting people, especially men, and she wasn't sure how long this strange arrangement between her and Colt would last. She didn't know him after all, and the world was full of people who would use her if given the chance. But over time, she began to relax, to trust him in small ways. She started sharing her thoughts with him, her stories about her past and the things she had learned growing up in the wild. And for the first time in a long while, she felt as if someone was actually listening. One evening, as they camped by a small stream, Colt sat down beside the fire, his face illuminated by the orange glow of the flames. He had been silent for most of the day, lost in his own thoughts. Kaya watched him for a while before breaking the silence. "Tell me about your life," she said softly, her voice hesitant at first. She wasn't sure if he would answer her, but the question had been on her mind for days. "Where did you come from?" Colt didn't look up immediately. Instead, he poked at the fire with a stick, his eyes staring into the dancing flames. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," he began. "Had a family, parents, a brother. We were just regular folk, working the land, trying to make a living. My brother and I would go hunting together, helping out around the farm. It was a simple life, but it was good." He paused, taking a breath. "Then one day it all changed. My brother. He got caught up with the wrong crowd. Some men came into our town, said they could make a deal, a way for my brother to make money, easy money. But it didn't turn out that way. The men weren't what they seemed, and my brother got hurt. Real bad. My family, we couldn't recover from that. I couldn't stay there after that." Kaya listened quietly, her heart heavy as she heard the pain in his voice. She had heard stories like this before, of families torn apart by greed, by men who used their power to destroy lives. Colt had been running from his past just like her. But unlike her, he hadn't chosen the life of a drifter. It had been forced upon him by circumstances beyond his control. "And now you wander," Kaya said, her voice soft. "You don't go back to the place you came from." Colt nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the fire. "I can't. Too much bad blood, too many memories. I don't stay in one place too long. Never have. I just keep moving. It's the only way I know how to survive." Kaya nodded, understanding more than he realized. She had been running for so long, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when the next person would try to control her, to own her. It was the only life she had ever known. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled and popped, and the night air grew colder. Kaya pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, but she didn't move to leave the warmth of the fire. She wanted to stay there, to keep listening to Colt's story, to understand him a little better. "I've been thinking about something," she said suddenly, breaking the silence again, "about where we're going. I don't know much about what's out there." She gestured to the vast wilderness around them. "I've never really left my people's land before. I've only ever known this kind of life, the one where you just keep surviving. But I wonder, is there something else out there? A place where I can live without always looking over my shoulder?" Colt looked over at her, his expression thoughtful. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he finally spoke, his voice calm but sincere. "Maybe," he said, "maybe there's a place like that. Maybe there's somewhere we can go where we don't have to run anymore. But we don't know yet. Not until we find it." Kaya stared at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had never dared to dream of something more. She had never imagined that there could be a place where she could truly be free, a place where she could belong. But hearing Colt's words, something deep inside her stirred. Could it be possible? Could there really be a life beyond the constant struggle for survival? The night stretched on and the fire slowly burned down to embers. They sat together in the quiet, the stars above them shining brightly in the clear sky. Kaya felt a strange sense of calm wash over her, the kind of calm she hadn't known in years. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she didn't feel so afraid of it. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a life without fear. The next morning, they packed up their camp and continued their journey. They rode together through the hills, the landscape stretching out before them, wide and untamed. Kaya felt a new sense of purpose, a new energy that had begun to grow inside her. She was no longer just running. She was moving toward something. And whatever it was, she wasn't alone. Colt was beside her, and for the first time, that felt like enough. As the day wore on, they came across a small stream. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was soothing, and they both stopped for a break, letting their horses drink. Kaya knelt beside the water, cupping her hands to take a drink, and as she did, something caught her eye. On the far side of the stream, there was a patch of wildflowers blooming bright and colorful against the green grass. For a moment she stared at them, feeling a deep sense of peace. Colt walked over to her, standing silently beside her. After a moment, he spoke softly. "You ever seen anything like that before?" Kaya looked up at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "No, it's beautiful," he nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It is. Maybe we'll find more like it." "Who knows?" Kaya glanced back at the flowers, the colors vivid against the green landscape. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival, beyond fear. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better. The days seemed to stretch on like the endless road beneath them. Colt and Kaya had come a long way, both physically and emotionally. As they journeyed through the untamed land, they had become more than just two travelers on the road. They were partners in a journey that neither of them could have predicted. Every day brought new challenges, but it also brought moments of peace. Moments when they could simply exist together, without the pressure of expectations or the weight of their pasts hanging over them. They had crossed rivers, navigated through dense forests, and camped under the stars. Kaya had become accustomed to this new life. She was no longer the woman bought and sold like cattle. With Colt by her side, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of ownership over her own life, a sense that her future was in her hands and no one else's. But as much as she had learned to trust Colt, as much as she had come to see him as someone who truly cared for her well-being, there was still a lingering question in the back of her mind. What was the end of this journey? Where would they go? What would they find? She glanced over at Colt as they rode side by side, his steady, quiet presence a comfort to her. He hadn't spoken much lately, but she could tell that something was weighing on him. She knew him well enough now to see the signs, the slight tension in his posture, the way his gaze seemed to be far away, lost in thought. "Where are we going, Colt?" Kaya asked, her voice breaking the silence of the morning. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees, and the distant mountains loomed ahead, still far off but drawing closer with every passing mile. Colt looked at her, his face unreadable for a moment. He didn't answer right away, his hands gripping the reins of his horse. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I've been moving for so long, it's hard to remember where I was headed. I guess I'm just following the road, seeing where it takes me." Kaya nodded, understanding his words more than she cared to admit. She had been following the road too, never staying in one place for long, always running from something, always running toward something else. But she had come to realize that the road they were on wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey, about the choices they made along the way. She was no longer running. She was choosing her own path, and for the first time that felt like enough. "We'll figure it out," Kaya said, her voice steady, one step at a time. Colt gave her a small smile, the kind of smile that told her everything she needed to know. He appreciated her strength, her quiet confidence. They didn't need to have all the answers, not yet anyway. They continued on, the land before them gradually changing. The thick forest they had been traveling through began to thin out, and the rolling hills gave way to a wide, flat plain. The landscape was vast and open, with only the occasional herd of wild horses grazing in the distance. It was a place where the horizon seemed to stretch on forever, a place where a person could truly feel small in the face of nature's power. As the day wore on, the sun grew hotter, and Kaya felt the weight of the heat pressing down on her. They had ridden for hours without stopping, and it seemed that the vast plains offered little relief from the sun's relentless rays. Colt noticed her discomfort and signaled for them to stop. "Let's take a break," he said, pulling his horse to a stop. He dismounted and began to unpack their gear, setting up a small camp under the shade of a solitary tree. Kaya followed suit, grateful for the rest. She had grown used to the journey, but the heat and the constant movement were beginning to take their toll. After they set up camp, Kaya sat on the ground, leaning against a large rock as she took a sip from her water flask. She looked out across the plain, her mind wandering. There was a peace here, a quiet that she had never known before. She could see the wind moving through the tall grasses, hear the distant call of an eagle soaring high above. It was the kind of place that felt both familiar and new, a place where she could let go of the past and simply be in the present. "Do you think we'll ever find a place to settle?" Kaya asked, her voice thoughtful. "Somewhere we can stay, somewhere we can call home." Colt was sitting nearby, sharpening the blade of his knife. He didn't look up immediately, but his expression softened as he spoke. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe there's a place like that out there. But I think we've both got some more road to travel before we find it." Kaya nodded. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for, whether it was a place to call home or simply a life where she didn't have to keep running. But she knew one thing. Wherever they went, whatever came next, she wasn't going to face it alone. That night, as they sat around the fire, the stars above them seemed to shine brighter than ever before. The flames flickered in the cool night air, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Kaya felt a strange sense of peace, as though she had finally found a moment of stillness in her chaotic world. She looked over at Colt, who was sitting quietly, staring into the fire. He had his back to her, but she could see the weariness in his posture, the exhaustion that had built up over the years. "We've come a long way," Kaya said softly, breaking the silence. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to stop running, but here we are." Colt glanced over at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he didn't say anything, just watched her with those steady eyes of his. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to stop either," he said, his voice low and almost lost in the crackling of the fire. "But maybe the road's finally leading us somewhere. Maybe this is the stop we've been waiting for." Kaya smiled softly, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. It wasn't an answer, not the one she had been hoping for, but it was enough. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was heading toward something good, something real. It wasn't just about the road they were on, or where they were going. It was about the moments they were sharing, the quiet conversations by the fire, the peace that came from knowing she wasn't alone. The next morning, they packed up camp and continued on their journey, riding through the endless plains. The road stretched out before them unbroken and free. Kaya didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. As they rode, the wind picked up, brushing against her face like a gentle reminder that they were still moving, still alive and still choosing their path. Colt rode beside her, the quiet understanding between them unspoken but clear. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And for the first time, Kaya felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could truly be free.